Hello, I'm doing a movie review, and the movie I want to review is Batman Gotham Knight. Now, Gotham Knight is a direct-to-DVD animated film, and this is actually part of a series of animated features from DC, and they're actually from the same people who made Batman the Animated Series, and you even got Kevin Conroy, who played the voice of Batman, and in Batman the Animated Series, playing the voice of Batman in this movie. However, this movie is not set in the same continuity as Batman the Animated Series. Supposedly, this movie is actually set in the same continuity as Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight movies. Like, when this came out, it was promoted as being set between the events of Batman Begins and The Dark Knight, and personally, I'm not sure if I really buy that, if this is actually set in the Christopher Nolan Batman universe. Personally, I think that was just a marketing gimmick, to really sell this movie, because, like, when you watch it, granted, when you watch it, there's nothing that really contradicts the idea of this being set in the Christopher Nolan universe, but at the same time, I don't really consider this to be part of that universe. I just consider this to be set in its own continuity. Now, this was a very, very interesting movie. This is actually an anthology film. It's like 6 short films all in one movie, and each of the short films has kind of their own different animation style, and the animation style in this movie is actually very similar to like an anime kind of animation style, which I actually really think that's kind of cool how they did that. However, not all the stories are the best. Like, in this movie, to be honest, I think the best stories are really the last 2. The other stories are good, but they're nothing that really, like, blows me away, but the last 2 stories are very good. So, the first story in the movie is entitled Have I Got a Story for You, and this one is actually a remake of an episode of the animated series entitled Legends of the Dark Knight, which in itself was actually based on a Batman comic from the 70s called The Batman Nobody Knows. Now, in the original comic, The Batman Nobody Knows, it was about Bruce Wayne taking a bunch of kids on a camping trip, and obviously none of them realized that Bruce Wayne actually was Batman, and in that story, each of these kids started giving their own unique take on what Batman actually was, and then in the episode of the animated series, which was entitled Legends of the Dark Knight, it was about a group of kids walking through Gotham City, and each of them started telling their own story on what they thought Batman actually was. So this first segment of the movie, which is entitled Have I Got a Story for You, basically plays on that same premise. So the plot of this first segment of the movie is it follows a bunch of kids at this skate park, and each of them claim to have had an encounter with Batman, and in each of the stories, Batman is fighting the same villain, like this man in black, and basically each kid is telling his own version, his or her own version of what they think Batman is, and in each one it's really ridiculous. Like in the first story, the kid depicts Batman as like a shadow demon, and in the second story, this girl depicts Batman as like a half-human, half-bat-like creature, similar to the character of Man-Bat, and in the third story, Batman's depicted as like a robot, and it's kind of funny because it's like, what the hell are these kids smoking? But, to be honest, this first story in the movie, it was alright, but it didn't really do it for me. To be honest, I thought this premise worked a lot better in the episode of the animated series. Now, this first story in the movie is actually written by Jack Olson, who I know wrote the screenplay for the David Cronenberg movie A History of Violence. It was alright, but it wasn't great either, and to be honest, I didn't really like the animation style in the first story either. Like, I found the kids to be kind of weird looking, to be honest, but Yeah, so the second story in the movie is entitled Crossfire, and the plot of the story is Commissioner Gordon assigns these two cops to take an escaped prisoner back to jail, and what happens is, like, in the story, both cops have very conflicting views on Batman. Like, the one cop, this woman, she thinks that Batman is doing a lot of good for Gotham City, and then the other cop really doesn't like how the police seem to be, like, condoning a vigilante, and they both have very conflicting views on Batman. But what happens is, after they drop this prisoner off, they end up getting caught in this fight between these two rival gangs, and they literally get caught in the crossfire, hence the title of the story. And basically, of course, Batman does intervene in the story, but I thought the second story was definitely a step up from the last story, but once again, I just found it to be decent. I didn't think it was anything like spectacular or anything. Now, the third story in the movie is entitled Field Test, and to be honest, this one is probably my least favorite out of all the stories. And I can't really say why, it's just this one didn't do it for me. I found this one to be kind of forgettable, to be honest. The plot of the story is Lucius Fox gives Bruce Wayne this device that can actually deflect firearms, and as Batman, he decides to use this, and he uses this when he goes after these gangsters, and what happens is one of these gangsters' men shoots him, and the bullet deflects off him and shoots somebody else, and basically the plot of the story from then on is Batman tries to save this guy that this device he's using basically almost killed. It's just the story didn't do it for me. I mean, so out of all the stories in this movie, this one, which is entitled Field Test, is probably my least favorite. The fourth story in the movie is entitled In Darkness Dwells, and this one is actually written by David S. Goyer. Now, David S. Goyer also co-wrote all of Christopher Nolan's Dark Knight movies. He also wrote the screenplay for the most recent Superman movie, Man of Steel. He's supposed to be co-writing the upcoming Godzilla movie. He also wrote all three Blade movies. He co-wrote Dark City, and he also wrote the screenplays for movies like Demotic Toys and The Crow City of Angels, so he's done a lot of stuff, and this story is definitely a step up from the previous one. The plot of the story is this cardinal gets kidnapped, and eyewitnesses say the cardinal was kidnapped by what appeared to be some kind of lizard-like creature, and of course it's Killer Croc, and so Batman, he goes to save this cardinal, and he does battle with Killer Croc, and after defeating Croc, he finds out that Croc was only working for the Scarecrow, and the Scarecrow actually kidnapped this cardinal and is planning on killing him, I think, and so Batman has to save this guy, and that's the plot line of the story. But this one was definitely a good one. This is definitely, like, I want to say that this is where the stories in the movie really start to get good. Now, the fifth story in the movie is entitled Working Through the Pain, and this one is actually written by Brian Azzarello, who also wrote a graphic novel called Joker, which I did a review for last year when I did the Batman reviews, and this one is probably my favorite out of the 6 stories. The plot of the story is it picks up right where the story In Darkness Dwells left off, and what happens is Batman, he's been shot, and he's also hallucinating because he got some of Scarecrow's fear toxin into him, and he's like wandering through the sewers, and what happens is in the story he has flashbacks to before he became Batman, and he was in India, and he saw this woman in India who basically taught him how to deal with his pain, and I think that's really the whole point of the story, is about dealing with pain, be it physical pain or or emotional pain, but yo, it's a very good story. This is definitely my favorite out of the 6 stories in the movie. Now, the 6th and final story in the movie is entitled Deadshot, and this one is probably my second favorite out of all the stories in the movie. Like, as I said before in the beginning of this review, I think the last 2 stories are probably the best. Basically, the story is about a hitman named Deadshot, who is actually a character from the comics, but I never read any of the comics that feature this character. But basically, this hitman is hired to go after and kill Commissioner Gordon, and Batman has to stop him. And it's a really good story, and the story is actually written by Alan Burnett, who was actually one of the people behind Batman the Animated Series and Batman Beyond and Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. Like, he was right with Paul Dini and Bruce Timm as one of like the main people behind all those shows. But yeah, the last story, Deadshot, is definitely a really good story. So that's it. That's my review on Batman Gotham Knight. It's an alright movie. I mean, some of the stories are better than others. Like I said, the last 2 stories are really good, and the rest of the stories are really just okay. You know, but I would still recommend it. It's definitely worth a watch, and I will say that some of the animation in this movie, with the exception of the first story, a lot of the animation is actually really beautiful. You know, it's really interesting seeing Batman done in an anime kind of style, which I never really seen done before, so it's definitely worth a watch, but it's certainly not one of my favorite Batman animated movies. So, yeah, bye.